Look, I don't care what the brass says. We run this range. And this little librarian isn't touching a Tier 1 rifle on my watch. The crowd of operators, a sea of hardened muscle and sun-weathered confidence, chuckled. It was a low, rumbling sound, the easy laughter of an apex predator pack that has just identified an outsider. But Sergeant Alara Vance didn't react. Her focus remained fixed on the task at hand, her hands moving with a serene, practiced economy. She was disassembling the bolt of her rifle, an older, heavily customized M21 that looked almost archaic next to the carbon fiber and polymer superweapons of the SEALs around her. Her movements were a silent refutation of the insult, a statement of purpose that needed no volume. The laughter died down, replaced by a tense, expectant quiet. The desert air over Range 7 was a visible thing, a shimmering curtain of heat that distorted the distant, pop-up city built for the sole purpose of practicing the art of destruction. This was the bleeding edge of military training, a billion-dollar sandbox where the nation's most elite warriors came to hone their lethality. Today, the sandbox belonged to SEAL Team 5's sniper element, and their commander, Jester, was holding court. He was everything you'd expect, tall, chiseled, with a voice that carried the easy authority of someone who had never been seriously questioned. He gestured with a dismissive flick of his wrist towards Sergeant Vance. She was an anomaly, a disruption to the established order of things. She was Army, for one, and from a unit no one had ever heard of. She was also slight of build, with a quiet, almost academic intensity that seemed utterly alien in this environment of loud, kinetic energy. Jester continued his monologue, his voice dripping with condescension. We're running the King's Gambit scenario today, gentlemen. 7 of my best shooters, designated OPFOR, are embedded in that city. They are ghosts. They are untouchable. The objective for the Blue Force element is to identify and neutralize all 7 targets without being compromised. The record, set by a MARSOC legend, is 3 confirmed hits before he was killed 3. And CENTCOM, in their infinite wisdom, has sent us her. He let the word hang in the air, freighted with disbelief. No spotter, no support team. Just Sergeant Vance and her museum piece. He pointed at her M21. Probably shoots an en-bloc clip. Ma'am, do you even know what an MIL reticle is? Or do you just use Kentucky windage and pray? More snickers. The social pressure was immense, a calculated public humiliation designed to break her composure. But Alara Vance did not break. She finished reassembling her bolt, the final click of the mechanism seating into place, sounding as loud as a gunshot in the tense atmosphere. She looked up, her gaze sweeping past Jester, past the smirking faces of the SEALs, and landing on the distant, shimmering city. Her expression was neutral, her face a mask of placid professionalism. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Understood, sir, she said, her voice clear and even devoid of any emotion. It was this unnerving lack of reaction that finally silenced the room. It wasn't defiance. It was like shouting at a granite cliff face. The other operators shifted uncomfortably. The joke wasn't funny anymore. The quiet woman with the old rifle had somehow, without raising her voice or changing her expression, taken control of the room. Her presence was a question, and everyone was suddenly desperate to know the answer. In the back, Fleet Master Chief Elias Thorne leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowed. He ignored the high-tech monitors displaying biometric data and atmospheric conditions. He watched her hands. He watched her breathing, and he felt a cold knot of certainty begin to form in the pit of his stomach. He was watching a level of discipline he hadn't witnessed since a snow-swept range in a forgotten corner of the world, a place where legends were forged in secret and buried under layers of classification. He was watching a ghost. The formal challenge began with a simple, electronic tone that echoed across the range. Blue Force, you are green. Exercise is a go. On the main screen in the observation tower, a timer began to tick upwards. Lieutenant Commander Holloway crossed his arms, a self-satisfied smirk returning to his face. All right, people, let's see what the Army's top librarian can do. I'm setting the over-under at 5 minutes before my guys have her position triangulated and send her packing. Any takers? His voice was loud, performative. He was trying to reclaim the narrative, to reestablish his dominance after her unsettling silence. For a long, agonizing minute, nothing happened. The timer ticked past 60 seconds, then 90. The desert wind whispered around the observation tower. In the simulated city, there was no movement. On the thermal imaging screens, there were no heat signatures out of place. Jester's smirk widened. See? Stage fright. You can't just walk onto the big stage and expect to perform. This isn't some weekend qualification course. This is the big leagues. He tapped a subordinate on the shoulder. Give me a comms link to my lead sniper. I want to know if they even see a heat signature from her position. But before the technician could comply, a small green light blinked to life on the massive tactical map. It was next to a label. Op for 1 is sterile, computerized voice announced. Blue force hit. Op for 1 neutralized. A collective stillness fell over the room. Jester's smirk vanished. What? How? There was no shot. I didn't hear a shot. He stared at the screen, his eyes wide. Before he could process it, another light blinked. Blue force hit. Op for 4 neutralized, then another. Op for 6 neutralized. They came in a rapid, terrifying cascade. Green lights blooming across the map like a sudden, lethal algae bloom. 2, 3, 4. Jester was stammering now, his arrogance completely stripped away. No way. That's not possible. The acoustic sensors aren't picking up anything. It has to be a system malfunction. Shut it down. Shut the exercise down. But the lights kept coming. 5, 6. And then, the 7th and final light ignited, casting a ghastly green glow on the faces of the stunned onlookers in the darkened tower. A final, calm announcement from the computer, all Op for targets neutralized. Blue force is victorious. A deafening silence descended upon the room. It was a physical presence, a heavy blanket of shock and awe. The timer on the screen read, 1 minute, 28 seconds. 7 of the most elite snipers in the United States Navy, hidden in a complex urban environment they knew intimately, had been systematically dismantled in less time than it takes to boil water. They had been rendered utterly irrelevant before they even knew they were in a fight. The narrator's voice would later describe it not as 7 separate shots, but as a single, fluid thought expressed through ballistic precision. The first was a clean, cold-bore shot through a window, a classic. But the data logs, analyzed later, would reveal the horrifying genius of it all. The second target was taken out by a deliberate ricochet off the steel frame of a water tower, a shot that defied physics and probability. The third was a thread-the-needle masterpiece, a bullet passing through the swinging gap of 2 laundry flags on a clothesline. The fourth and fifth were taken out with a single round, a collateral shot through a thin interior wall that no one even knew was penetrable from that angle. The sixth was a thermal shot, a bullet sent not at the man, but at a steam pipe directly above him, causing a superheated rupture that would have instantly incapacitated him. The seventh, and most terrifying, was a shot aimed at the antenna of the lead sniper's communication pack. Timed to the exact millisecond, he keyed his mic to report the first impact, ensuring the cascade of failures remained silent. On the firing line, Sergeant Alara Vance methodically ejected a single, spent brass casing. It spun through the air, a tiny golden star against the blue desert sky, before landing softly in the dust. She placed her rifle back on its bipod, her movements as calm and unhurried as they had been before she began. She had not just completed the exercise, she had redefined the very concept of impossible. The room remained frozen, a tableau of shattered assumptions. Jester stood with his mouth agape, his face pale. The swaggering confidence was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed shock of a man who has just witnessed a fundamental law of his universe be casually and completely broken. He mumbled, his voice a hoarse whisper. That's not possible. His world, once so certain and clearly defined, had been irrevocably tilted on its axis by a quiet woman with an old rifle. It was Fleet Master Chief Elias Thorne who finally broke the spell. He moved with a purpose that commanded attention, his presence cutting through the stunned paralysis of the room. The operators, even the SEALs, instinctively straightened up, their eyes following the living legend as he walked from the shadowy corner of the observation deck to the main console. He didn't look at Jester. He didn't acknowledge the room. His focus was singular. He had seen that impossibly fluid efficiency before, that seamless transition from absolute stillness to devastating action. It was the hallmark of a very specific, very small, and very secret tribe. He remembered a younger version of himself, 25 years prior, on a frozen plain in a country that officially denied their presence. He remembered his own instructor, a quiet British SAS legend, describing a new breed of operator being cultivated in the American Special Operations community. Individuals who were not just soldiers, but warrior scholars, masters of physics, psychology, and the quiet arts of lethality. He had dismissed it then as myth-making. He was no longer a skeptic. Thorne reached the primary console, and his thick, calloused fingers moved across the keyboard with surprising dexterity. He bypassed the exercise-level security clearances with a few swift commands, diving deep into the central personnel database of the Department of Defense. Jester finally found his voice, though it was thin and reedy. "Master Chief, what are you doing? The system is clearly malfunctioning. We need to run a full diagnostic." Thorne didn't even turn around. "The system isn't broken, Lieutenant. Your understanding of it is..." The screen flickered, and a personnel file appeared. At the top, a simple, unsmiling photo of Sergeant Alara Vance. Thorne stared at it for a long moment. Then he began to speak, his voice low and authoritative, each word landing with the force of a hammer blow. "Sergeant Alara Vance, United States Army," he paused. "Primary military occupational specialty, 18 Delta. Special Forces Medical Sergeant." A murmur went through the room. That alone was impressive. "Secondary MOS, 18 Charlie. Special Forces Engineer Sergeant." The murmur grew louder. A dual-qualified Green Beret was rare. But Thorne wasn't finished. He was just getting to the heart of the matter. He scrolled down the file, his voice taking on a tone of near reverence. "Graduate, Special Forces Sniper Course, SODIC. Distinguished Honor Graduate. Score perfect. Record still stands." He continued, his voice a steady, relentless drumbeat of accolades. "Graduate, British SAS Counterterrorist Sniper Program, Hereford. Top of class. Graduate, GIGN Advanced Marksmanship Module, SADERI. Top of class. Instructor Certification, Level 4, John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School." The room was now utterly silent, the weight of the words pressing down on them. These weren't just schools. They were the hallowed temples of their profession. To simply attend was an honor. To graduate at the top was the stuff of legend. Thorne scrolled further. Combat deployments, 7. Afghanistan, Iraq, Horn of Africa, and 4 additional locations classified. His finger traced a line on the screen. Commendation, Combat Infantryment Badge. Silver Star for gallantry in action. Bronze Star with V device for valor, with oak leaf cluster, indicating a second award. Army Commendation Medal with V device. And a list of unit awards and foreign decorations that are extensively redacted. The mystery of her skill was being laid bare, not as a malfunction, but as a curriculum vitae of impossible excellence. Just as the weight of this revelation settled, the door to the observation tower hissed open. Sergeant Vance walked in, her rifle held at a perfect low ready. She was there to debrief, a standard procedure. She stopped just inside the door, her eyes scanning the room, her expression as neutral as ever. Master Chief Thorne turned away from the console. He looked at the slight, unassuming sergeant standing before him. He saw not a librarian, but a living repository of a warrior tradition so elite that most soldiers never even knew it existed. Without a word, without a moment's hesitation, Elias Thorne, a fleet master chief with 35 years of service and a chest full of his own medals, drew himself up to his full height. He brought his hand up in a slow, precise, and profoundly respectful salute. It was the ultimate gesture of public anointing. It was a high priest of the warrior, caste acknowledging one of his own gods. Then he spoke, his voice filling the cavernous silence. "Sergeant Vance, apologies for the technical delays." He then turned his gaze, hard as flint, onto a pale and trembling Lieutenant Commander Holloway. "Lieutenant," Thorne's voice was now ice. "You didn't just question a soldier's qualifications. You questioned the architect of the very doctrine your men just failed to execute. The King's Gambit scenario? She wrote it 5 years ago, as part of her instructor qualification thesis at SWCS. Those 7 untouchable positions your men were using, she chose them. She designed them. She taught the instructors who taught your instructors how to think about urban hides. You weren't running a training exercise against a random army sergeant. You were a student taking a final exam you didn't even know you were failing, administered by the professor who wrote the textbook. The story of what happened on Range 7 spread not like wildfire, but like a pressure wave from a detonation, silent, swift, and utterly transformative. It didn't travel through official channels or after-action reports, which were immediately classified at a level far above even Jester's clearance. It moved through the invisible channels of the special operations community, the barracks gossip, the hushed conversations in chow halls, the encrypted messages on secure forums. It became a piece of modern folklore. They called her the ghost of the range, they called her the professor, and, in an act of communal irony, they embraced the name Jester had tried to use as an insult. The librarian, the name stuck, but its meaning was inverted. It no longer signified meekness. It signified a vast, deadly, and perfectly cataloged knowledge of the craft. SEALs, Rangers, Green Berets, and MARSOC Raiders, operators who lived and breathed arrogance as a survival mechanism, spoke of her in tones usually reserved for founding fathers of their units. They pulled the sensor data from the exercise, which had been mysteriously leaked to a low-security server for a few hours before being scrubbed. They analyzed it with an almost religious fervor. The physics of the ricochet shot were debated for weeks. Ballistics experts from the Naval Surface Warfare Center were brought in, and their report concluded that the shot was a 1 in a billion probability, requiring a mastery of environmental factors and material science bordering on precognition. The legend grew with each retelling. It was said she didn't use a digital wind meter, but could read the spin of a single dust devil 1,000 meters away and calculate the deflection. It was said she could gauge distance not with a laser rangefinder, but by the subtle shifts in color and heat haze. These exaggerations were the community's attempt to comprehend the incomprehensible, to mythologize a level of competence that defied their own rigorous standards. They needed to believe she was more than human, because the alternative, that a human being could achieve that level of discipline and skill through sheer effort and focus, was far more intimidating. It meant that they, too, were without excuse. The impact on Lieutenant Commander Holloway was the most profound. He was not officially reprimanded. Master Chief Thorne knew that public disgrace was a less effective tool than personal epiphany. Instead, Jester was left with the ringing silence of his own shattered ego. He disappeared from the social scene of the officers' club. He was seen, early the next morning, on a basic qualification range, alone. Not with a high-tech SEAL-issue sniper system, but with a standard M4 carbine with iron sights. He spent 8 hours firing single, deliberate shots at a paper target 100 meters away. He was not practicing for a mission. He was performing an act of penance. He was deconstructing his own arrogance, one round at a time, stripping away the layers of gear and bravado to find the flawed fundamentals beneath. A few days later, he found Sergeant Vance in the armory. She was where she always seemed to be, in a quiet corner, meticulously cleaning her M21. The air was thick with the smell of gun oil and solvent. He stood there for a full minute, silent. The bustling activity of the armory seemed to fade away, creating a small pocket of stillness around the two of them. Vance didn't look up, but her hands paused in their work. She was waiting. Finally, Jester spoke, his voice quiet and stripped of all its former bluster. "Sergeant," it was not a command, but a simple acknowledgement. He swallowed, the sound loud in the quiet space. "I was wrong." The admission hung in the air. It was more than an apology for an insult. It was a confession of a deep, professional sin. The sin of assumption, of judging worth by appearance. He took a breath. "Teach me." It was the most vulnerable, and perhaps the most courageous, thing he had ever said. He was an officer, a SEAL team leader, asking an enlisted soldier from another branch, a woman he had publicly humiliated, to be his student. He was placing his professional development, and what was left of his ego, entirely in her hands. Alara Vance finally looked up from her rifle. Her eyes, which had seemed so placid and unreadable, now held a flicker of something new. It wasn't pity or triumph. It was acceptance. The quiet professional's work was never done. If someone was willing to learn the right way, it was her duty to teach. She gave a small, single nod, the same one she had given him on the firing line. "All right, Lieutenant." Her voice was soft, but carried the weight of her entire classified history. "Let's start with breathing." Her humility was as absolute as her skill. She didn't gloat. She didn't lecture. She simply began to teach. In the ready room of Range 7, a small, unofficial ceremony took place a week later. Master Chief Thorne, Lieutenant Commander Holloway, and Sergeant Vance stood before a newly mounted plaque on the wall. It was simple, made of dark walnut. Glued to the center was the single, gleaming brass casing for Vance's first shot of the exercise. Below it, a small brass plate was engraved with 4 words. Vance Holloway Doctrine, Day 1. It wasn't a memorial to an event. It was the cornerstone of a new philosophy. It was a permanent reminder that competence speaks for itself, and that the loudest voice in the room is often the one with the least to say. The legend was now officially part of the institution. A year passed. The shimmering heat over Range 7 was the same. The dust was the same, but the culture had fundamentally changed. The Vance Holloway Doctrine was no longer just a plaque on a wall. It was the core of the curriculum for the entire Joint Service Marksmanship program. It was a philosophy that stripped away the reliance on technology and ego and rebuilt the art of sniping from the ground up, focusing on the unglamorous, brutal fundamentals: patience, observation, mathematical rigor, and above all, humility. The swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet, intense focus. Trainees were now issued logbooks before they were issued laser rangefinders. They spent their first week not on the firing line, but in a classroom studying physics, meteorology, and the psychology of perception. The King's Gambit scenario was now the final exam for every graduating class, and no one ever called it easy again. Its architect was spoken of with a reverence that bordered on religious. Commander Rick Holloway, he had been promoted, was now the lead instructor of this new school of thought. He was a changed man. The arrogant, cocksure officer was gone, replaced by a patient, thoughtful teacher. He often began his first lecture to a new class of operators by telling them the story of his own humiliation. He would point to the plaque on the wall. "That brass casing," he would say, his voice steady and calm, "is the most important lesson you will ever learn here. It represents the moment I realized that everything I thought made me elite. My gear, my title, my unit was worthless. I was humbled that day by a soldier who had none of those things, but who possessed the one thing that truly matters: absolute competence." She didn't need to tell us how good she was. She showed us. Your job is not to be the loudest operator in the room. Your job is to be the most effective. And effectiveness is born from discipline, not from ego. His story became a foundational myth for the new generation of snipers, a cautionary tale against the dangers of assumption. The institution had absorbed the lesson. The story of the quiet sergeant who rewrote the rules was now institutional folklore, a tool for teaching the most difficult lesson of all: respect. New trainees would arrive, full of the same bravado Jester once had, and they would be humbled not by failure, but by a story. They would look at the simple plaque and the single brass casing, and they would understand. True lethality wasn't about the patch on your shoulder or the brand of your rifle. It was about what was in your mind and in your soul. It was about the relentless pursuit of perfection, a pursuit that leaves no room for arrogance. And what of Sergeant Elara Vance? She was gone. A few weeks after the incident, her name simply disappeared from the base roster. There was no transfer ceremony, no farewell. She just wasn't there anymore. Rumors, of course, were plentiful. Some said she had been recruited into a new, even more secretive Tier 1 unit, a ghost among ghosts. Others said she had finally retired, leaving the world of shadows behind to live a quiet life, perhaps as a librarian. No one knew for sure. Her physical presence was no longer required. Her legacy was now a permanent part of the institution's DNA. She had become an idea, a standard against which all others were measured. Her silence had been the seed, and from it, a forest of quiet professionals had begun to grow. The final philosophical truth of the event on Range 7 was not about a single, astonishing feat of marksmanship. It wasn't about the 7 shots or the impossible ricochet or the humbling of an arrogant officer. It was about the enduring power of demonstrated competence. It was a lesson that true legacy isn't a list of accomplishments you leave behind. It's the culture of excellence that continues to move forward because of your actions. Alara Vance's greatest shot was not the one that hit a target 1,000 meters away. It was the one that reshaped the mindset of an entire generation of warriors, teaching them that the ultimate weapon is a quiet, disciplined, and humble mind. Her actions prove that respect is not a right of rank or a privilege of reputation. It is a debt owed only to those who have earned it through silent, undeniable skill. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption, and where silent discipline defines true worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.